Genesis, when do you think, not that it really matters, when you're going to get to your computer and switch?
About 3 minutes.
About 3 minutes. Cool. All righty, we'll get started. And I think there's a couple other people going to zoom in, but they can watch the recording at the beginning. Welcome everyone, and welcome Genesis. Genesis is will be a new face once he gets to a computer, a new person here in the mastermind. And Genesis, in the email that I sent, there's a recording to the first session that we have, and I'd recommend if you want to go in and watch that, gave a more comprehensive like introduction and context to this mastermind, and everybody gave an introduction to the projects they're working on and why they're inspired to be here. So if you haven't already listened to that first session, that's a good way to get a little deeper context. I'll give like a quick little introduction here, an overview. And then there's also, I saw that you filled out the questionnaire. Thank you for doing that, Genesis. And another good way to learn about other people involved in the mastermind is to read through that. There's a lot of great projects and information in there. And John Paul, I can't remember if I looked at that.
I did the survey right before I got in here.
Okay.
And this is my first mastermind.
Yeah, and this is John. I've been in so many meetings with you, John Paul, but I forgot this is your first one here in the mastermind.
Yep.
Cool. Well, so I'll give a brief little intro here, and then we'll get started. It looks like Marin just zoomed in. Welcome, Marin. So the context of why is just, I personally feel, and I think a lot of us feel the same, why we're here, that there's a lot of challenges on the planet right now. And I feel that regenerative community development is a very holistic approach that really, in a way, can almost address any of the challenges that we're facing. So I think it's a really important thing to be focused on the planet right now. The 7 generations philosophy is a lot of what is guiding me. And I think that most indigenous, I think all indigenous cultures have an awareness of that 7 generations philosophy, not only living for my life right now, but like how are my actions and the way I'm living impacting, my children's grandchildren.
Recording in progress.
Do the future generations have a healthy, thriving, beautiful planet to live on as well? And so that's a lot of the context to why doing this. A little background on my space. Welcome, Genesis. Nice to see you. My background's architecture. Worked in an architecture firm when I first moved down here to San Diego. Started up a nonprofit in 2012, focused on regenerative community development. We had a prototype eco-village project outside of San Diego for 2 years in Valley Center. We all did training in sociocracy, used that as our governance model and our organizational model. And that was one of the most inspiring parts of that 2 years, actually, to me, was learning how to make decisions together, how to organize the group in a way that really distributed power and authority and voice through everyone. And then I'm also working with Marin and a group of people to start a company called Light's Place, which is a platform for regenerative community development, which will connect real estate property owners with the consultants and the specialists that they need to develop their property in a regenerative way and to help manage the projects as well. So that's a little background to myself. The framework for these masterminds, each one is kind of a standalone unit, but we definitely kind of build on an arc through 12 months. And you can look back at the topics that we've already done for the last couple sessions. And the mission, I'll put it here in the chat, is to provide inspiration, information, experiences, and resources for the design and development of regenerative communities, projects, and policy at local, bioregional, and global scale, And then the vision is, I'll drop that in the chat as well. A world where the human species lives in balance and harmony while contributing to the optimal health and well-being of the planet as a whole. So there's kind of the context, the mission and vision for these mastermind sessions. And we have a handful of different case study projects from small scale to larger scale that we're using to reference during the mastermind. And one of the projects right now that I have listed in the document is the Lumeria project down in Baja, which John Paul's actually been to that property. A friend of ours has 15 acres down in Baja on the Sea of Cortez side. It's right on the beach, has a private beach. He's currently designing a yoga retreat center on 3 acres, and the other 12 acres he's very open to what kind of eco-village intentional community development project takes place. There's already 2 4-bedroom 4-bathroom houses on the property, and then a third building that has a big community kitchen and a studio upstairs. It's all powered by solar, and he's got a desalination unit there on the property, so it's fully off grid. And I'm actually going to do a 3-day Gathering of the Tribes event down there, October 20th through the 22nd, for people that want to learn more about the Lumeria project and potentially be involved. And then we're going to have a 7-day community incubator week after that for people that want to stay and co-live and co-work down there and dive a little deeper into the Lumeria project. So that is one of our case studies for the mastermind. I will be down there on the land for the next 2 months. And so kind of real time going through this process for these 15 acres. And one of the examples, and this isn't the focus for today, we're going to get into this in a couple months for the next sessions, but we're exploring ideas of putting those 12 acres into a land trust that would be governed and stewarded by like the residents of that community. And so, for example, we'd need to find, an attorney that has the knowledge of how to create a land trust in Mexico. And so those are some of the things we're going to be exploring with that. And we'll go through, all of the processes of the themes for these 12 months of the mastermind will be like going through on that 15 acres for the next 2 months. And so thank you for adding your name in here, John Paul. For those of you that are new, like I said, you can go back and watch the recording in that first session, and everybody gave, maybe a 1.5 to 2-minute introduction to themselves. And there's a lot of great people, a lot of great projects involved with this mastermind. So I'd highly recommend you go back and listen to that first recording. But right now, let's do for the 2 new people, Genesis and John Paul, let's do like a 90-second like introduction. And I'll post it here in the chat, just the prompt, name, location, brief introduction to what has you feeling inspired to participate in this mastermind. Briefly share any projects you're working on and skills and experience you have that you feel are supportive to the mastermind. And so keep it, there's around 1.5 minutes or so. I'll give you a little timer if you're going on, but let's start with you, John Paul. And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm John Paul. I live in Taos, New Mexico. I've been here for about 5 years now. I actually met Josh here in Taos. It was 2020, I think. He was driving through here and just recently came through here. I have a community of 8 acres in Carson, New Mexico, which is just outside of Taos, with 6 other people. We each have 1 acre, 2 acres in common land that we all contribute to. It's kind of slow. I have a hyper adobe building that I built there. Just a little 120 square foot building. So I have some experience with building with Adobe. I've been spending a lot of time up at the Llama Foundation in Llama, New Mexico. which is an intentional community that's been around since the 60s. That was Ram Dass was cooperating with them and wrote the book Be Here Now. And kind of learning from their community and plan on spending more time up there. They just closed on Sunday. And I'm a software engineer. I've been developing web applications for a very long time, and have some fun projects. Habit.earth, which is right now it's branded as the Sustainable Network. I'm rebranding that Habit.earth, and I'm working on a geolocation-based social networking site for Taos, which is taos.love. And yeah, a lot going on. And I do online medical education, and I'm about to go to Florida and get the license for that software. They're gonna give me I'm gonna sign a non-compete, but I'll have access to a learning management system as well soon.
Awesome.
Yep.
John Paul, what did you say habit.earth, or what was the other website?
Yeah, habit.earth. I also own habitearth.com.
Okay.
But yeah, that's right now it's an online directory of sustainable businesses. And there's maybe 100 or so across the globe on there, but looking to grow that. It's actually tied into Taos.love. So all the information that comes from Taos.love will go, if it's sustainable building or agriculture, it will go automatically to Habit Earth. That's part of my company, Forest of Knowledge. I'm building a bunch of trees of information that's tied together. Yeah, like a mycelium network.
Awesome. Well, welcome, John Paul. Thanks so much for being here, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Genesis.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Genesis, located in Nevada City, California. Sweet little festival town up here. Anybody's been? It's just actually over in Santa Fe, so we used to live in Santa Fe, John Paul. So anyhow, honestly, I'm going to be just like totally, completely straightforward here. I saw a Facebook ad pop up. It was regenerative community. There's a mastermind. I was like, holy crap, sounds great. Easy entry. And that's why I'm here. I've never been in regenerative community. I've never even lived on land. So, I'm feeling kind of like small in a room full of giants. I did listen to the first mastermind. And I think Melissa said, like, she wanted to live on land, got to get on land, and then finally did. Well, I feel like I'm on the step just before that. So I'm in the want to get on land, want to get my family on land. I got a 2-year-old son, and yeah. So I mean, as far as what I have to offer, I've got a background in marketing, video production. Happy to offer those skills. Also, I have a family home, which I am looking to sell and flip over into a land project of some kind. So those are basically what I'm bringing to the table here, as well as, if I may say so, a shit ton of enthusiasm for this work. I really feel like this is not only the way I want to live, but it's going to be the only way to live, to continue on in any kind of a sane way that I want to raise my son in. So, this is like a must, and I'm very enthusiastic, and have a lot to learn, and I really see that, and learning that more by watching these masterminds and being on this call. So yeah, I'm here to learn, here with open arms, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for being here, Genesis. And your comment of feeling small in a room full of giants. Like we're all totally on the same page and level here. We all got skills and magic to contribute to the regenerative planet that we're all co-creating. So yeah, you definitely don't no need to feel that way. I think all of our skill sets can apply to the regenerative community development. Just we figure out how to support the movement and plug in. And so welcome. Thanks so much for being here. And I can feel that. I feel like you have your son, and I know John Paul has his child as well. And I think that often when people are like, okay, what kind of planet are my kids going to live in, you know, is a very strong motivating force. So yeah. All right. So each month we have a design challenge, and we're invited to like pair up with somebody or a couple people throughout the month and work on it together if we want to. There's no obligation to do that, but just to have a little bit more engagement with one another and have some accountability with one another. So our last month's design challenge was to share 3 core values that we have for our ideal community or project, and then 3 deal breakers. And so I can actually I'll put a link in the chat here for a list of them that I wrote out, and then my deal breakers I'll put here too. And I'm not going to read through all of those, but let's like open up for some of you to share what 3 of your core values and or 3 of your deal breakers are for a community project. Go for it, Peter.
Okay, so just a little background. This is for a Costa Rica community that is not manifested yet, but the plan is to go down at the end of this year, look for land. I've had a very clear vision, and I have a lot of people that are ready to invest. And so the essential and some of the core values that I came up with some friends and in discussion was working through triggers and trauma together as a community. I think that's really important. With that, it goes with acknowledgement of addictions and the ability to shift and transmute that. Then having elders on the land as examples, and to help with, in particular, holding the space and being a wisdom keeper for everyone in the community to go to, and to help with any problems that they're going through, just kind of as a mentor. And then the final value is communication in a nonviolent communication way. Reading the book will be part of the requirements. And then kind of like a fourth one is living in communion with the local tribes and the ways of tribal living, in addition to kind of fusing with other ways like what's that called, earth ships and things of that nature. And in Costa Rica, a lot of people build with bamboo, so we'll definitely be incorporating that. And then some deal breakers that we came up with was no hard drugs, no alcohol, no weed, and making sure that there's equal contribution to the community projects, which is 4 hours a week for each one of the contributors. So that's what we came up with.
Awesome, Peter. Love it.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap there with mine. I can share a little bit, but like let's leave it open for another couple minutes. Do anybody, John Paul and Genesis, like, knew you weren't really working on this over this last month, but if there's anything that pops up that you want to share, or if Azza, Kelly, yeah, if any of you have something you want to share, go for it.
I like what all of you said. I think they were all great points. One of the most important things for me is just family orientation. Like, as a father, I noticed that my child loves being around other kids. And that's one thing that I found incredible at the Llama Foundation. They also incorporate meditation every day at 7:30 for a half hour. They sit together, they have a meditation room. I think that's really great. And they cook meals together, so working together in community, that's my primary reason why I want to do this, is because we have kind of a nuclear family dynamic these days, and also just I feel like we need to get back to tribe. So I'm looking forward to learning from you guys too. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about this, but that's what I have to contribute on top of what you guys have already contributed. I think you guys all made good points.
Awesome. Thanks, John Paul. Anybody else have anything you want to share?
Yeah, this
Yeah,
is Azza. Oh, go ahead. Somebody else wanted to share?
Yeah, go for
No,
it.
go ahead, Azza.
Genesis, go.
Yeah, no, I have spoken on this earlier, I mean, in previous calls. But yeah, I'm in the process of creating first the vision. We have bought land in Ghana, West Africa. And we also want to have a sister community here in the States, maybe in Central America, but we're kind of looking in the areas of like Arkansas or Texas, where there's not zoning laws or less zoning laws. And the foundational principles, as you mentioned here, are very much in alignment with the other gentleman that's speaking about dealing with trauma, because it's called, well, the vision is that we have a school for youth where we tell the truth, not the lies that are being taught our children in the public schools. And we have a holistic healing center that everyone really has to make a commitment to their own personal growth and development. And this holistic center can be, used at any time for the members as well as a business for others. And the concept is that without taking full responsibility for your own issues, you can sabotage anything, specifically the community. And that, that this energy, that I'll just call it an energy, I won't name any specific names. I call it the doobie, the dark, out of balance, evil energy beings. But this energy that has been trying to divide us and conquer us and deceive us and confuse us and shame us and all the other things that we all have been victims of it. I won't say victims in that we can't change it, but we have been, recipients of it, and that no one has gone unscathed. And in fact, we come to this planet Earth to heal our wounds, to become more enlightened and whole. And that, that we are all in this challenge, and that it's highly important to recognize that. I don't necessarily state that there shouldn't be any specific things except abuse of anything, because we do believe that there are indigenous plants and medicines that our Creator gave us to use to help us heal. Cannabis, psilocybin, things like that. So with very careful use, I know it's still not legal in many places, that is included in our healing. Just to say something against what somebody, not against, but to add to what someone else said about not allowing that stuff. So that's different. We are a group of right now 5 people who are in the planning process. And we are actually it's 6. One of them is only in Ghana. And we're looking for land here. And if anyone is in alignment with this project, we're definitely open to meshing our visions and values. And the one other element that's very important is I'm a performing artist. My husband is also a performing artist. He's a drummer from Ghana, traditional drummer, worked with the National Dance Theater of Ghana. And I'm a professional dancer and dance therapist and hypnotherapist, massage therapist, many healing arts. And we're interested in also creating a performing arts center in the community, in the eco village, because we feel the arts are extremely important for our happiness. It's one of the gifts that we were given by our creator to dance and sing and draw and paint and act. And we also recognize that ourselves as a spiritual community, that's highly important, that we all recognize that we are spirits having an experience in a body, and that we've been in and out of these bodies, different lives. Not this body, our spirits have been in and out of different bodies and different lives. And the center is not necessarily attached to any one religious ideology, though it sees the similarities in that we are all part of God's creation, and they are many times historical documents that can be used to comprehend the past and what has happened with the struggles that are still happening today.
Yeah.
So yeah, and with that I yield. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aza. Appreciate your sharing.
Of course.
And I have something to share on 2 things that both of you shared, but I'll let you go first, Genesis, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah, Oz, I appreciate what you shared about, recognizing the, whatever forces they are that are currently or have been in, at the top levels of control in the world, and that we're shifting that. For me, that's important as well as not to like dwell on it or anything like that, but just to kind of recognize that we're what we're moving away from and what we're moving toward. And for me, what I want to move toward is a community that's sustainable in the face of any state of the world. So, not just in the current state of the world, but in a completely different state as well. Completely, not necessarily completely self-sustained within the community itself, but maybe within the larger community in trade and things like that. That's very important to me. And I just want to touch on, I know it's been touched on several times, but the part about trauma and working through those shadow moments and in community. Me personally, I'm most interested in the human aspect. I mean, I studied myself my entire life, and those are the aspects that I would really want to hold space for, and that would be important in any community I would be a part of, is that every being in every state, that there's space to hold for their process, and also of course with respect and boundaries and other things like that, of course. But like just holding that we all have stuff to learn from each one of us. I know that I have something to learn from everyone that I met. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, one thing that I felt a similar alignment with what Peter was sharing and what Aza, and one of my core values similarly, and a deal breaker, is clear agreements around the use of substances and not wanting addictive behaviors in the community, and a focus on holistic health and well-being. And we all can have our own perspective on what holistic health means to us, And then, when we're forming something intentionally with a group, then we come with we create a shared vision of what we feel holistic health is. And we spent a long time on our project talking about, we had 6 months of meetings forming our agreements before we moved onto the land together. And we talked a lot about substance use, and some people were in favor initially of like just like no drugs or alcohol, no substance use. And then some people had some reasoning where we didn't know if we wanted to go like full on like ashram style of like, if somebody wants to have a beer with dinner, that they can do that, but we didn't want somebody that needs to have like 5 beers every night with dinner. Like there's a difference to, in that, we decided. And so we came up with some agreements around like if a couple times, like I think up to twice a week, if you wanted to have an alcoholic beverage, and up to like 2 beverages each time. So it wasn't like getting drunk and have it. It was like intentional, like somebody might enjoy having a beer with dinner, and like a couple times a week, that's fine. And we had a similar thing with cannabis, like if up to twice a week, if you wanted to experience your cannabis intentionally in your way, but we didn't want everybody stoned on the land all the time. And so that was kind of the happy medium that we came to, like not quite like saying like zero use of any substance, but very minimal use, is what we felt like was cultivating a atmosphere of holistic health for our group, for the 12 of us that were doing that project for those 2 years. And then in terms of like plant medicine and stuff like that, we did have in our agreements like intentional and conscious use of certain plant allies and ceremonial use, where upon agreement from everybody that we were open to having that type of experience on the land. And so those details, like agreements, get pretty clear. It's like it's much easier if you're just like, if a group's like, hey, we want zero substance, we don't do anything, like that's how we operate. It's one part of me likes that, just like it's super clear. You don't need to get into all these like nuanced things. But then I also do have the space of like, I very, very rarely drink, but every, twice a month, I might want to have a beer with a dinner or something with some friends or something. And also like could go off the land to do that if like the village was like, there's no alcohol on the land. And so like I could go out, and have a beer with a friend or something. But so it's great to hear, some of you share your core values, your deal breakers. And I think these are really important things to learn about upfront immediately, before people start going down the road too far together, because, maybe you're like, oh, we're thinking of getting land, and we've been meeting for 6 months and we haven't talked about some of these things. And all of a sudden somebody's like, no, I don't want any substance on the land. And somebody's like, oh, like I want to have that beer. And, like that can cause disharmony in the group. And if there's real clear deal breakers of like, somebody's like, I 100% like want to be part of a vegan and vegetarian community, I want zero meat or animal products in the community, that's not gonna jive harmoniously with somebody who wants to eat meat. And so it's really good to identify those things super clear up front, so you don't go down the path and then be like, oh, we're actually not aligned on these things. So for this session today, we're going to have, depending on our time, try to keep these in an hour and a half, we'll have like up to potentially 3 different topics, and I'll post them in the chat right now, of how big, what's the scale of your ideal community project. And there's a couple prompts here, questions, just like expand that question of how many people do you envision living in your community or being involved with your project? What is the ideal population size that cultivates a sense of community while maintaining a sustainable and regenerative lifestyle? How will the scale of your community impact the use and availability of resources in the bioregion? How will the scale of your community affect your ability to implement regenerative practices? How will the scale of your community impact your process to get started? What resources, money, and amount of land are needed? So this is what we're gonna, we're gonna riff on now for maybe the next 10 to 15 minutes. is the scale and the idea of not just part of whole systems design. What I really appreciate in like lifestyle design is not just having things arbitrary, like really intentionally making a decision why you choose something and have some process of why you chose that. And to start with, I can seed this discussion with in a permaculture design course. It was the first time I heard about Dunbar's number, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Dunbar's number. There's an anthropologist doing research on human dynamics of how many people can effectively work together, maintain interpersonal relationships. And it's based on the capacity of our neocortex. Different species have different Dunbar's numbers, but for the human species, it's about 150 people. And you look at large military battalions, large corporations, you see, you know, they break down into smaller groups, and you'll see Dunbar's numbers show up in different societal systems. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh, I can see a village of 150 people. Like I can hold that in my mind, and I can actually think about systems design for 150 people. To me, that's more of like a neighborhood village. And I can think of, oh, how would I design a solar system for this 150 person village? Would I, you know, design a bunch of south facing rooftops and put a few panels on each roof? Would I put a centrally ground mounted system that feeds the whole village? I can think of, you know, rainwater catchment systems design, gray water systems, a farm, you know, what scale of community farm would we need to feed 150 people? Like those are all like, I can wrap my head around that. When I live in San Diego right now, when I try to think of like, oh, how would I design an energy system for 2 million people or to feed 2 million people? It just like the scale gets so big. So I really have come down to like wanting to focus on these village neighborhood scale designs of like 100, 150 people, 100 to 200 people. And then there's also a James Ulrich. He's I think a professor at Stanford, and he's part of Regen Villages. And they've done a lot of research, and they came to the number of the economy of scales with like production and materials that they felt. And I need to look back at my notes. There's a conference that he talked about this, but I would say it was between 200 and 300, 250 and 350 people, where the size of that village made sense economically with like, I mean, shipping materials there and blah, 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 blah. And so I want to dig deeper into like how they came to that number, but the base concept being it's not arbitrary. It's not just like, oh, I want 900 people just for no reason, or I want 10 people for no reason. Like why you want the size you want. And so yeah, let's just kind of open it up to thoughts and philosophies and ideas on that.
Can I say something about that, Jonathan?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're having this discussion today. It's top of my mind. I was told by a friend that has really been looking into this and has lived on community and knows is actually creating a community here, in the process of creating a community here, that 100 families is pretty much the minimum to have that sustainable. Now you talked about people, you know, that might be a little different than families, but basically 100 homes is the minimum in order to keep that sustainable through, like I was saying, any type of economy, any type of world situation that we might find ourselves in. You know, any smaller than that, then we don't really have the hands necessary to be able to build what we need on the land. And any more than that, it just kind of gets out of hand. So yeah, I'm really interested you know, look at that Dunbar's number and look back at the reporting for the other thing that so what it's called. Yeah, very curious about that.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Genesis.
Yeah, I'd be interested to share on this as well. For those who don't know me, I'm Kelly. My company's New Earth Development. We're creating community in Costa Rica that is currently planned on 600 acres. And So we really wanted to incorporate ecological preservation with how we can live in harmony with nature and building on, degraded land. So land that we can build on and not have to cut down any primary forests, but actually be able to plant trees, plant permaculture gardens, things like that. And we're going to be doing a much larger scale project than most. And I just wanted to share a little bit about why we decided to do it like that. Because I've been involved in many of these projects at many different scales, from 2.5 acres all the way to 4,000 acres. And so it all depends on really the size of the project, and all of that. And the reason that we're going to be having probably 200 residential homes. We're also going to have 200 condos, which originally I was kind of against condos, but we want to build new types of condos that are actually in harmony with nature. And we like that they have a much smaller footprint on the land. And people that don't want to have a lot of maintenance with their lots or their land, they can have a more affordable way of living that's also within the community, as well as rental spaces and all of that. So there could be up to 1,000 people or so on this land at once. And we really want to be as food self-sufficient as possible. So we were considering, how much food do we need to grow to be able to provide for all of these people? And I think I saw something where it's like anywhere from like a 1/4 acre could feed a whole family for like a year. And of course, people may still need to supplement with things they need to buy at the grocery store. But like the concept is you could live on the food grown if you wanted to. And so we're understanding like, okay, we have 600 acres, and could people have gardens within the back of their homes for all of the lots that then they could trade and share amongst one another to be able to have different types of food amongst the community and have enough for everybody to be food self-sufficient. So if it's a 1/4 acre, for 1,000 people, we would need 250 acres of land. So that's why we're incorporating the kind of backyard infrastructure for food. And the reason that we chose doing a lot of homes is because the more like to make it financially feasible, but also be able to supply all of the regenerative infrastructure. So food self-sufficiency, water, energy, putting solar on every home, or other types of energy things, and then waste management for the whole community, you need quite a lot of infrastructure. So some of the additional profits from the home sales and the lot sales can go into paying for that infrastructure so that people don't have to pay the additional HOA fees that a lot of communities need to pay. So we're providing a way to have access to basic needs, plus profits can go more into building amenities so people can live the higher quality lifestyle, such as a creation hub, artist studios, music studio, makers spaces, co-working spaces, zero waste grocery, sustainable retail stores, things that actually allow people to live in alignment with those values. So we're kind of doing a mini town. And so people can actually, have a way to live in alignment with those values, not just within their a small area, but in the greater area. And I think it's really important to integrate Dunbar's number into this project of like sectioning maybe off the master plan in, how can 150 people live kind of in a similar area where they have a certain community lounge that they go to so that people can more interact amongst one another and have the kind of social aspect of being able to have maybe just that 150 people, but still, if they want to go and experience other areas of the community, they can. So yeah, we're still in the phase of understanding how this is all going to work, and it's all going to be a big experiment, but that's just some of the reasons why we decided to do a larger scale project and how I see that it could potentially work with providing that self-sufficiency.
Awesome, Kelly. Thanks so much for sharing. That's, yeah, the scale and the scope of that like is so expansive, and like just like the thoughts and the creativity go of even one fractal smaller than that with 150, and a model that we had been working on with Local Earth with a nonprofit that I started. And I'm not attached to this by any means, but I think it's got some interesting concepts of the Dunbar's number, 150-ish. And then also the sociocracy-based process of like, a core value of ours is like using that council-based leadership, and there's not like one chief of the community or one CEO or president, that really we have a good process for making decisions and working together. And so like they say that I think like 9 to 12 is like the max that can like sit in a circle for an hour, see one another, hear one another, be heard. And so just even like working with 12 months, distributed leadership, we started working on a model of like 12 living clusters of 12 people each. And so that living cluster of 12 people, once a week get together and have their little cluster meeting. 12 people sit down, talk how things going this week, any problems arise, blah, 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 blah. And then one representative from each of those 12 clusters could then come to like the village meeting, and that'd be another circle of 12. And so like, hey, here you had updates from all 12 clusters, and your whole village of 144, 150-ish people is like, got some pretty good communication going amongst it. And so I think getting into that design of like, okay, what does it look like to cluster 12 homes together? And do people want to live in a condo or apartment type thing where they're sharing a wall with somebody? That's a different energy than not sharing walls. To somebody like, hey, I want 200 feet between me and any other structure. So those are different design parameters. And what it looks like to design a cluster of 12 or a cluster of 6. Just like why 6, why 12, and just like having reasons why. And part of that could come to like architecturally, like if how your roads and like pathways are flowing through a land. And if you have a road going off in the little cul-de-sac that you want a certain amount of houses around it, and you want a certain amount of feet between each of them, like maybe you can only fit 6 and you can't fit 12, and so there needs to be 2 little Ys of 6 and 6 or something. But all of these are kind of design parameters that the idea would just be to like consciously make them, not just like arbitrarily make them. Go for it, Peter.
I was just going to say that I have the same idea for the model, is actually 144 adults, because that's a sacred number. There's the 144,000 that's been prophesized by many masters and things like that. So 144 is just under that 150, and then it divides into 12 groups of 12, and then you have the council of 12. But what I've been contemplating is when you're in that council of 12 and you're voting, let's say on a community project, and it's 6 and 6, then what do you do from there?
So the way that sociocracy works, and by no means does anybody need to use it, that's what we chose to use, and that's something that I really am a fan of, like holocratic and sociocratic based processes. So it's not a majority vote process. It is a consent-based process. And so anybody would make a proposal for something for the community or for that specific group that they're working with. And then you go around and you ask if there's any objections. And if somebody has an objection, then you go through the rest of the
Recording in progress.
And see, I just got oh, there we go. And so you're aiming towards actually coming to a proposal that nobody objects to. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're fully like excited and on board with it. Like, is it good enough for now, safe enough to try? That's something that you'll learn in like sociocracy based like training. And you'll put, if somebody has an objection, you try to like reverse engineer it and be like, what's the source of that objection? How could we modify this proposal to like you having no objection to move forward with? It doesn't mean like that you're like, full, like this is the epic, I think it's the best thing, but like, okay, I don't have an objection to it. I'm willing to try it for, 3 months or 6 months, or put a parameter onto that proposal. And so, because if majority-based voting, if you're just going with 51%, and it's like you're trying to get a decision out of 12 people in the council, and it's 6 and 6, and it's got to be 7 and 5, you can have an extremely divided community then, with like people that are like, hey, like we're gonna now like start to resist the people that did this, you know. And it's like that's not the energy that we're going for. So you would aim towards a consent with no objection. They don't recommend it in sociocracy, but holacracy, like you could put an amendment in there of like, if, you know, 3/4 of the decision makers in the circle want to go to a majority vote, like somebody could propose that and be like, hey, we've been talking about this for an hour or two, we've been talking about this for 2 weeks. Like, I don't feel like we're getting towards our consent. I propose that we go to a super majority vote. And like, if 3/4 of the people say yes, then you actually put that proposal to a vote. And if, you know, you would write that in your domain of names and your operating agreement of like how that would. Sociocracy doesn't really recommend that. They recommend you try to go towards full consent from people in the circle. But holacracy sometimes will like have an amended decision-making process. And then you can decide that, is it a 51%, is it 2/3%, is it a 3/4%? Like the higher you go, obviously, the more, you know, the more about like, I think 51% you can have very divided. You know, if you have 3/4 of the people on something, there might be a couple people that didn't feel super stoked, but you got a pretty good majority that are feeling good about it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That sounds, I haven't contemplated that type of model, but I really like it. I'll have to do a little more research on that for sure. So sociocracy is kind of where I should start with that, looking into it.
Yeah, there's a really good book called Reinventing Organizations that has a lot of case studies in it. It's a great book on kind of like, they call it teal level, from like spiral dynamics, like teal level of consciousness is kind of what they're saying is kind of the new, the evolution of organizational models. And yeah, it's a good book to read through.
Okay, thank you.
I could say something real quick about that, Joshua. I
Go for it.
really love that idea of sociocracy, like you're saying, getting everyone on a yes, consent. And what I also see about that is that you're now creating an environment where, like you said, it's not us versus them, but you're creating malleability and openness in creating a yes in the community, if that makes sense. So instead of pitting, you know, folks against each other, now you're creating an environment where it's like you're working with each other. It's almost like I imagine like working with my own psyche, you know, like part of me wants this and part of me wants this, you know, but how can we all be a yes and all find that in a way that feels good, like a family unit? That kind of makes sense. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but I'm really feeling it a lot and I appreciate it.
Yeah. And they train people to like see an objection as like wisdom, like, hey, somebody in the tribe has some wisdom that we're not seeing about something. So not like, hey, why are you being a pain in the ass and objecting to this? I'm like, hey, thanks for sharing your wisdom and seeing something that maybe all of us didn't and bringing it to our awareness. And the nuanced difference between like something of consensus, which the woman who wrote this book, Creating a Life Together, Diana Leaf Christian, she went around and studied a bunch of communities around the world and documented the ones that are successful. And she used to actually promote consensus, and then she did a switch, and she's like, it's too time consuming, it's too like energetically draining. I really promote sociocracy and holacracy because it's designed to be much more efficient. And so like, let's say you have a village of 150 people, you create little they're called circles, little subcommittees or teams that are going to deal with like, hey, these 8 people are making the decisions. They're on the community garden and farm circle, and they have the decision making. We've nominated people to be on that circle that we trust in the community, and they have the semi-autonomous authority given to them by kind of the founders circle to say like, hey, you guys can make the decisions for the community farm. The 8 of you need to come to consent in that circle, not all 150 people, because that's going to be like you're gonna have 10 hours of meetings and feel drained and this and that. So it's designed to be like more efficient, and it's so like learning that distinguishment between consensus and a consent-based process in operating circles.
Amazing. What was her name again? Diane.
Leaf Christian, and she has a book called Creating a Life Together. It's great. They have like 8 case studies that they went around, and the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center was one that I really enjoyed. Yeah. So any other like thoughts, ideas around scale, size? John Paul, you got anything?
I could talk about what I've seen, like from experience at like the Llama Foundation. I believe they have about 80 acres. Not all of it's being used. A lot of it's like shrub oak, and they have a capacity of 60 people, and they're 100% off grid. They said that they spend $8,000 a year on propane for like cooking and heating. And they also have a model that's like kind of it's an education facility, so they have income coming in. I think it's kind of a good idea to think about, you know, ways that your community can generate income, because people are interested in these types of things. You could do like some Airbnb rentals on the property, you know, to bring people in and, you know, teach them about your community. But for, as far as scale, the size goes, I like the idea of Dunbar's numbers. And, you know, if it was going to be larger than that, I like the idea of having grids, you know, like having sections of people that can have the ability to incorporate, but they have like their own hub to go in between. One of the ideas that I had, and somebody mentioned this in another community group, was kind of a timeshare kind of thing where you can travel from community to community. So like a way to work with other communities, so you can, you know, take turns in the wintertime staying in one community and contributing, and in the wintertime some people get to go somewhere south, you know. So I think it's a good idea for us to create some sort of communication network between all of these communities. And, you know, one of the other things, there's like a paradigm kind of where some people just want to be off grid and do it as minimal as possible. And then there's also like the financing aspect of things, where like getting funding, because one of the challenges I see with like getting 1,000, let's say 1,000 families, is like, do 1,000 families have $100,000 in cash, you know, to build a house, or do we need to get banking involved and get financing involved? Because, you know, if you want to have 1,000 families come in, you have to have housing for them. So are you hiring construction crews or people living in tents? You know, they're building houses. I think like these are important things to talk about. But, you know, as far as the numbers go, I agree that Dunbar's numbers and sociocracy, those seem to be some of the best methods. An idea for a model is also, I've heard, is you putting it all in an LLC and then giving people shares in the LLC. That's kind of, but yeah, Dunbar's numbers, as I agree that it's a proven method for people to know each other, you know, by their face, and have a social interaction with people and remember who they are. That's, you know, Dunbar's numbers is what people use. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks, John Paul. There's another kind of end of the spectrum of like the Dunbar's number, and that thought of like, okay, if we the larger the scale, if like we're aiming for like 1,000 homes, or like Kelly's talking about 200 homes and 200 condos, you know, we're looking at a much bigger upfront potential cost to develop or start this community. So that's another thought of like, you know, it's much more ambitious to try to get 600 acres and 400 homes than a group of like 10 friends saying, hey, like let's all put in 15 grand each and buy some land in Costa Rica. And you know, that's a much smaller endeavor to get started. And one question could be like, you know, like the 600 acre vision for Kelly is, you know, then like how potentially could we phase it out? And like, hey, the first phase obviously still need the funding to get the whole 600 acres, but then like the development costs of like, hey, maybe we're actually only trying to develop the first systems for 100 people or something, you know, and get that going for a year or two, and then plan to expand to the next 100 or 200 people or something like that. I'm not saying that's the answer, but just like a thought process to go through. And on the smaller end of that spectrum is something that I found, because we had about 11 or 12 people involved with our project for those 2 years. And that's, you know, that's a doable, like that's Emerald Village here in San Diego. We have a group of about 10 friends that came together, bought 10 acres. They've got this great village there for, I mean, geez, going on 10 or 15 years now. And the thing with that scale is it's doable. It's much more doable up front, but energetically and interpersonally, what I've noticed is like, if you have 10 people, all of your energetic fields, your emotions, like you're super intertwined. And so if like 2 people are having a lot of conflict in, you know, a group of 10, or if there's like a relationship or something, it can definitely be felt by the whole village if there's a lot of conflict going on between 2 or 3 people. And if you've got 150 people, it's a much bigger energetic pool. And if some people are having conflict, like they're still having it, but it's not maybe having as much of a ripple in all 150 as it is if there's like 8 of you living together or 10 of you. And so I think that's something about the resiliency of a little bit bigger model that can deal with the conflicts and the waves and the thises and that's. You know, it feels a little bit more resilient than that smaller scale.
I just want to chime in one thing because it brought a thought up. Sexuality is something important to consider because, like in the Llama Foundation, it's a lot of 20-year-olds with hormones and stuff going, and some of the older couples that are there started saying it was like a summer camp kind of vibes happening there. So maybe putting that something that addresses that. I don't know how to deal with that kind of situation, but you know, there's conflict that comes from that too. So maybe something to consider when you're building your core values and infrastructure. I don't know.
We talked about that in our project for a while of like, you know, was there people that were wanting to be polyamorous in the community, or how did we feel about nudity? It was another big thing of like, a lot of people want to be like, hey, we can like go in the garden and garden naked if we want to, you know? And so most of us had a shared value of wanting to be able to be like, there's nothing wrong with nudity. You want to be naked, like that's okay. But these again are like some of those core value things that I think it's good to address up front, because if you've got totally different mindsets that people have and you get like 4 months down the road and like then are like realize you have very different perspectives on these things. And what I think we wrote out in our agreements around like, you know, we accept like anybody's perspective on sexuality. If people want to practice polyamory, like that's totally fine. There's no expectation that everybody needs to explore that, you know. Yeah, it definitely in terms of conflict, or you know, I mean, the Emerald Village, I know like they have a lot of their community does have a little bit more of a poly approach, and like there's a lot of interpersonal dynamics there, and it's definitely a good thing to. And Tamara is an amazing community in Portugal that has a very different approach to sexuality and relationship, like a very, very different approach. And so they have a thing called the Love School, and that's one thing they're most known for is people like go to the Love School in Tamara in Portugal. And brother Jason's there. He's not far from there, so maybe you're gonna go participate in one of those, Jason.
Hey, yeah, I'm interested to check them out. I heard it's German based. originally, and it's pretty established.
Yeah, it's really
And yeah, I just like the fact that they're well established, and so just to be there and learn from osmosis, just yeah, that's it. It's funny we're talking on this subject because I'm living in a community house with 4 others, and it was really late. Just a quick story. Really late the other night, and I walked naked into the kitchen. I don't even quite remember. I think I just needed a glass of water or something, and I guess one of the girls had saw me or something. It's weird. I don't think there's cameras in this house. And they went to the main guy and said something, and so it was uncomfortable for them. So anyways, for me, it's like no big deal. It's late at night. I'm just grabbing a glass of water, but these things are important to some people get offended. So yeah, it's interesting.
yeah.
So that just happened today, so I just find it interesting that you're on that subject. So.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Anything else that people want to share around scale? I know we're kind of weaving other things into scale here. That I mean, they all integrate, but anything specifically around scale that people want to share? And if not, we can go on to the next question, which is, where is your community? And I'll put a couple prompts here in the chat of in which geographical region or climate do you envision your community being located? How will the location of your community affect access to resources, zoning regulations, employment opportunities, and engagement with the surrounding environment? What criteria will you consider when selecting a specific site or existing community for your regenerative endeavors? So let's open it up to, like the reasoning why we would choose where.
I have a specific question or concern.
Yeah.
About this, or just sort of to bring this to the table. Just putting it out there, being frank, like I'm concerned with personally my family being in any community that's not in the United States, specifically because in the United States we have Constitution, and to put it frankly, we have guns, and for any type of overtaking of society, if it were to come to that, and I hope and pray and believe that it hopefully won't, but if it does, like that's important to me. So just putting that out there. I know there's lots of folks who are not in the United States, and curious to know, what your thoughts are. Maybe you don't think about that at all. Maybe you think that's not an issue, and if so, I totally respect that. And that is a concern and a thought process for me, and where I want to have my family.
Genesis, can you, I caught most of that. I was also trying to catch up on some people have put some notes in the chat that I was trying to read. So could you like succinctly share like the core part again, where you say inside and outside and the concerns around that?
Yeah. So inside of the United States, we have the Constitution and we have guns. Outside of the United States, those things do not exist necessarily, like they do here. Guns, gun rights, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So those things, in the case of some sort of upheaval, whether it be from the ground up or the top down, those are important things for me, and where I want to.
So yeah, that's a super important one. And with the core values, that's something that we talked about on our project was, do we want people to have weapons on the property? Like, were you allowed to bring your guns to the land? And we had hours of really thought-provoking discussion around it. Some people being like, absolutely, I want to be able to protect myself, I want to be able to protect the village. And there's a lot of reasonings and mindset and perspective how you could come from that. There's other people that were like, absolutely not. Like we want to like embody the energy of Aikido and peace here. And like, we don't want to like live in fear, and that we're going to fight that with aggression, and like, fascinating discussions. And then that's another core value of like somebody's like, I will only live here if I have guns, you know, and some people are like, oh, I don't feel safe with guns on the land. You know, that's a good thing to get clear up early. And like Costa Rica has been on my radar for so long. Parts of the reason I like the country, that a lot of the tax money goes towards the environment, the education, not towards military. And like, and the United Nations peacekeeping troops in essence are the entity down there that upholds things, you know. And so do we have trust in the UN peacekeeping troops? Do we have trust in, you know, whatever the US law is? I mean, it's a really great question to spark into the why we would choose one country or state over another.
And just to be clear, for me, I was less addressing within the community, and I was more addressing outside of the community, in the larger, you know, national community. What is the mindset around that, and do people have numbers? That's mainly what I was addressing.
Yeah, I would like to say something about that. This is Aza.
Yeah, go for it. Then you, Kelly.
I totally am in alignment with what is the gentleman who just spoke?
Genesis.
Yeah. You know, there's a real, like I spoke about earlier, there's this divide and conquer mentality that has been you know, imposed upon us for thousands of years that we're really struggling with in this country right now. And I'm living in the Northeast, and it's very apparent to me that there's a huge brainwashing. I won't go into the details of what's really going on, but the reason I'm mentioning that in response to what Genesis just said is that there's a definite attempt to steal us of our rights right now. And the United States of America and the Constitution for the United States, which is the original Constitution, not the superimposed one that came with the Act of 1871, which is all about statutes and codes and military, is the only Constitution that I know of, or that I think anyone knows of in the world right now, that really does let the people represent themselves. And even though we're not fully embracing that because of this division and this act that brainwashed us all, I feel it's extremely important as well. That's why I also want to do my community in the United States, one of them, and have a sister in another country. And I picked Africa because, well, my husband's from there, but also because I just feel that they're a little bit less brainwashed at this point. So yeah, I totally agree that the fact that we need to stand up for our rights and make sure that our Second Amendment right is not violated, which is very much being attempted to be done right now, and all the other you know, rights that we have. So this is just a confirmation of Genesis, and thank you for saying that, Genesis. That's it.
Thank you, Aza.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little on, just to touch on what Genesis shared, but also, you know, a little bit more on why we ended up choosing Costa Rica. Because, you know, I never really thought about, Genesis, what you shared before, but I do have this sense of like, you know, I'm from the US, so it's like, whenever I go back there, it's like, oh, I miss it a little bit when I'm not in Costa Rica, because there's just so much access to convenience, and there's, you know, like the systems that you're talking about. You know, I think Costa Rica really helps me feel safe, sort of like that the US does with the Constitution and rights and things. I'm not sure about the gun regulations here, because that's something that I don't really, I'm not really super opinionated one way or the other on it. But Costa Rica actually has protection of the US military, so they're kind of in an alliance in a certain way. And they don't have a military, like Joshua said, so it does feel a little bit more peaceful here in that essence. And some of the reasons that we chose Costa Rica was specifically because of the building regulations. In the US, especially, well, me being from California, it is a lot more difficult to build there, a longer permitting process, a lot more regulations as far as what types of materials you can use, which, you know, a lot of them haven't been sustainable. So trying to transition to sustainable types of materials is a little bit more difficult. Some are getting approved now, like straw bale, hempcrete, things like that, which is great. But still, like, it can take 5 years just to build one house versus 5 years to build an entire community in Costa Rica. It's like it's still about a 2-year permitting process. In some cases, 1 to 2 years. But it's much shorter, and we're really familiar with it now, working here for so long. So, and also the zoning regulations, almost impossible, specifically in California. Texas is actually a little bit better, as well as some other states, as far as like being able to build kind of whatever you want with housing, commercial, all in one land. Or you will have to, you know, find a place that has residential right next to commercial if you want to build something that also has the, you know, like a retreat center or some sort of commercial endeavor with it, which is very hard to find in a lot of places around the US. So in Costa Rica, it's really nice because you can build commercial, residential, whatever type of zoning you want. All you have to do is get they call it a condominium regulation here in Costa Rica, where you can build multiple houses, or if you just buy raw land, you can already start building agricultural parcels and have some small commercial spaces, but they have to be on 5,000 square meter lots. So it's just so expansive what you can actually build in Costa Rica, from the timeline to the building materials to the zoning regulations. So that's ultimately why some of the reasons why we chose Costa Rica, as well as that we love it. All the nature here and the weather and the beaches and the people. And there's already like over 100 for sure eco villages in Costa Rica. So we know that it's very possible to do here, and we can network with like minds in the area. So yeah, that's kind of where our thoughts were as far as choosing the geographical location.
Love these topics. And want to chime in with a thought process there. And just real quick, back when we were talking about the guns and that type of thing, if anybody hasn't watched the documentary Wild Wild Country, it's on, I think, Netflix. I just posted a chat the trailer in the chat. It's a fascinating documentary, and it goes deep into like what can happen with guns and different types of energies. And it's about like Osho's community that they created in Oregon. And the first few episodes, it's like, oh, peaceful people coming together and doing meditations and farming, and like a lot of it was like, oh, like this is like totally what we're doing with like the local Earth Village. And then by the end, there's bombs going off and like private militias and machine guns and training and people dying, and it's worth watching. It's a pretty well balanced documentary. They don't like, I think they kind of share different perspectives around it, but really thought-provoking.
I would like to add something to this as well. I was at that Osho community. I know about it. I'm actually a sannyasin of Osho.
Okay.
And I mean, I visited when I was very young. And it kind of corresponds to what you were saying. The woman, I don't remember her name. I'm sorry.
Kelly, probably.
Kelly. Okay, sorry. I'm have to hear names a few times. Kelly was saying about Costa Rica. And so what happened in Oregon, I won't go into the details, but basically our United States government, there was internal issues as well. I'm not blaming it all on the United States government, but the United States government and the neighbors and things had a problem with such a loving community being in this country, which, again, it's not the only issue. There were other issues. There was some disrespect amongst the neighbors and things like that. But the reason I'm trying to make what I'm trying to say is that addressing Kelly's point about the zoning laws is what I've learned actually after having an experience where Child Protective Services stole my daughter 2 years ago. And what I've learned about the incredible corruption in this country and the child trafficking that's going on in this country, um, that Trump is actually has been standing up to with his executive orders. And speaking of movies, there's a great movie right now called The Greatest Show on Earth that I would recommend everybody. You can find it on Rumble. And the reason I'm saying this is because I feel it is our obligation as United States, you know, citizens is hard word to use because they use it against us, but in the traditional sense of citizenry, for us to stand up for the original Constitution and not let those zoning laws control us, because that all those zoning laws are part of the superimposed statutes and codes of a constitution that does not correspond with our original Constitution, where we the people are being we are not to be controlled by them. They work for us. And the fact that they're imposing all of these things on us and how we can drive and how we can develop the land and all that, we have to stand up to that. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it's something you can do. I have learned to do it since I had this very traumatic encounter with Child Protective Services, and it's necessary for us to do it. So it is an option to go to a country where it seems, easier. It is harder to stay here and stand, and you have to know how to do it. It's not impossible. And that I feel that this movement of regenerative communities would very much serve us if we take on that task. And I can talk more about that, but I don't want to go into it. But I just want to make that point. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you, Azza. Yeah, these are deep, big questions that I wish we had time right now to go actually deeper into, and we're kind of at the top of the hour, so we'll closing this up soon. But so one of our case study projects, Melissa Orion, she's not on here right now, but she has 44 acres in Colorado, and it's networked with Diamante Luz in Costa Rica. Like, those two communities are working on that process where people can go travel between the two. And they all are focusing on kind of this triad trinity model. And I might be blanking on the third one right now. So there's a combination of having a 501c8 or whatever the religious entity is that the land can be held in, and then what's a PPA, a private, personal membership.
Private membership association.
Yeah. And
Private membership association.
Yeah. And then the third one, what's the third one? I have it back in my notes, and I've talked about. So there's like a kind of a triad of three entities that, in essence,
Land patent, maybe.
Maybe the land patent, the Lloyd land patent, possibly. In the U.S., that where you could almost say, like, this is our sovereign land. We have, like, we're not subject to your zoning laws. If the sheriff tries to come in and say, like, do you guys have composting toilets? If the appropriate people are at the gate and know the language and can actually show the document saying, like, this is not actually in your jurisdiction. So it gets deep. So some people that really want to go down like this rabbit hole of like sovereignty, being a sovereign being, getting into the government and the policies of all this, like, it's a deep, rich, amazing discussion. And I'm really fascinated in it. Some people might just want to be like, hey, I just want to play by the rules of whatever country I'm in. I want to go create an ashram with 15 friends in Costa Rica and just abide by the zoning laws there. And, like, there's very different approaches to that. But this is a very rich topic of discussion. And then there's also like the concept of the network state that's forming, which through kind of the interwebs of creating communities of people that, maybe there's 900 acres here in this country and these people that are doing this, and they're aligned with these other 500 acres in this country, and like they start to create their own bylaws ethics of how they operate, and kind of say like we're starting to form our own sovereign network state. And if you apply, and try to integrate that with the United Nations, maybe UN peacekeeping troops are supporting your values and this and that. But these are big big discussions that we probably won't have time to get too far into right now. But yeah, thank you all so much for this very thought-provoking discussion. Each of these topics every month, like they're all so important. We covered 2 of them right now, and we've got another 10 very deep, important questions to evaluate when we're talking about building community. So next month, we're going to get into a process of evaluating like who are your people, who do we invite, who's part of this project, what types of buildings and architecture, so that the materials, how we're sourcing things. If we have time, we'll get into like what is the ownership stewardship model for the community. That's a big one. Is it held in a land trust? Is it LLC where everybody has a share? Do people own their own private lots? There's a lot of different ways to approach that, and a lot of different theories and values as to why you would approach it in that way. So that'll be next month. And in the meantime, so our like design challenge for this month, let me pull up the notes here and I'll post it in the chat. Link sharing, design challenge, post it there in the chat. Will be, and like ideally we try to come together, like you can do it on your own, but if you want to try to connect with somebody else in the mastermind, either via like our introduction document has a lot of people put their email and their phone number in there. You can reach out to somebody directly. Our Telegram group is another way to reach out and be like, hey, does anybody want to get together and work on the design challenge for this month? Let's meet next Tuesday at 1 o'clock or something. So I've done that a couple times with people. You can do it on your own, but if it's, encouraging us to meet with one another and collaborate on this process. So get really clear on what is the scale of your community project is one of the questions. And I'll kind of post, there's a document that outlines all of this, and you'll receive that in the email. And then getting really clear on the where is your project. So those will be our design challenge. So next month, when we come back together at the beginning, we'll review and hear what people thought of the scale and their where. If anybody's interested in the Baja project, I'm actually leaving next week. I'll be down there all of October and November. And I think I might have actually, I'll put it in the chat here if anybody wants some more information on that. We have a website link. If anybody knows of anybody interested in anything in Baja. There is the website and the details for that in the chat. If you want to get anything out of the chat, you can copy and paste it here, and then here in a moment or two, we can wrap this up.
I just want to say thanks, Joshua, for holding the container. That was a fun one today. And these are, like you said, deep topics, and ones that are close to my heart and my mind that we're taking on. And, these are like part of building the new earth, right? Like we're kind of starting from scratch here and creating it as we go. So I appreciate you holding that container today.
Yeah.
And I appreciate everyone's input. And yeah, I just appreciate this group so much. Thank you.
Yeah, honored to have you here with us. Thanks for being here, and you're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Aza.
Blessings to all. Peace.
right. Blessings, everyone. Jason, you still there?
Yeah, brother. How you doing?
Good. Let me stop the recording.
Yeah. Let's chat for a minute.